At the start of my interview journey, I was invited to an assessment centre with DLA Piper, and it was a large group exercise. We were each in different groups on different tables, and there was an assessor on each table. We were told we had to basically read this case study and then have a discussion about it and then go present. And the assessors would be assessing us having the discussion. And within the first few minutes, I felt completely out of depth. The candidates on the table, they seemed very confident. They seemed like they knew what they were talking about. And we had this reading time to read the case study. I just couldn't absorb what I was reading. I kept thinking about the fact that I had to understand what was going on, but I was panicking about this group discussion that we were going to have. And by the time the 15 minutes were up to read the case study, I hadn't taken in anything. And the group discussion started and I had no idea what anyone was talking about. So I ended up leaving that case study. I said I wasn't feeling very well. It was a disaster. Now I say all of this to show you my starting point. My starting point was that I was not confident in interviews. This was something that I had to learn how to build up over time. I had to build it in the interviews I had in the future, and I had to build it in life generally. I speak to thousands of candidates in a year where they have this problem of believing in themselves, having the confidence and conviction in their answers. This is why I want to talk about it today, because I think confidence has such a huge impact on your career trajectory, and it's something that you can build up over time. Now, confidence is something that I refer to as the highest leverage skill. Now, often candidates come to myself or people on the team and they say, for example, I've got an interview with BCLP coming up. Do you know the questions the interviewers are going to ask? Now, the problem with this is, yes, you can memorize answers to certain questions, but a good interviewer will move you off script, test to see if you actually understand what you're talking about. And at the same time, there's always going to be questions that you haven't prepared for. And that's why the goal of working on your confidence in an interview setting is threefold. The first is, how do you answer questions that you haven't prepared for? Second, how do you say what you want to say despite feeling very nervous in an interview? And thirdly, how do you think on your feet and talk through your thought process, say for example in a case study interview under the pressure from a partner? Now let me start by saying, what is confidence in an interview? Now, confidence isn't coming from a place of perfection. Like, it's absolutely fine to make mistakes. Confidence isn't also making statements about yourself that aren't true. And lastly, confidence isn't knowing all the answers. The way I see confidence in an interview, it's having the courage to have conviction in your answers, because you know how hard you've worked for the things that you wanted to achieve. It's being able to talk about your experiences and your hobbies and interests with passion, and it's being authentic because you have your own life story, your life journey that other people don't have, and they can't share that same experience. So my view is that you will go a lot further in this process if you have self-belief and conviction in what you say, even if you make some mistakes along the way, because you're being authentic, as opposed to being someone that tries to memorize all the answers but gets to the interview and doesn't have the self-belief in themselves. And if you think about the role of a commercial lawyer, there are going to be so many situations where you're asked questions and you don't know the right answer, and you have to know how to deal with that situation. Even in my very short time as a trainee, I can think of an example where the associate on a deal, it was the first deal that I'd ever worked on, they called me to ask some questions, and I had no idea what the answers were, but I had to know, how do I communicate that in a way that comes across as professional? And this is why developing this level of confidence to handle these situations where you don't always know the answer is extremely important. Okay, so onto the practical advice. And my first piece of advice is to give yourself the permission to have confidence. What I mean by this is, I've never met a candidate who was too confident preparing for an interview. It's always the other way. And candidates are so worried about coming across as bragging or arrogant that they downplay their experiences. And I get why this is. You've had to deal with this lifetime of being used to talking down your experiences. It's not normally acceptable to do in day-to-day conversations, but it is something that you have to do in an interview. When you get to an interview, this is your one shot. And if you don't sell your experiences, if you downplay them, no one's going to know how hard you worked for what you wanted to do, and no one's going to know how impressive you are. No one else is also going to sell your experiences for you. And I find a good test for whether I'm selling my experiences enough is whether I feel uncomfortable as I'm saying it. And that's not because it isn't true, it's because it's telling me that I probably am doing it quite well, because this is too much for me in day-to-day conversation. And the last point to make here before I give an example is just this problem I see where candidates are coming for a practice interview, and I've had the benefit of seeing their experiences already, and it's really impressive. They've, achieved many impressive things from my perspective. But then they'll ask questions based on their experiences, and they sound very doubtful. They talk down their experiences, they don't talk about it passionately, and they're so focused on applying a formal structure, like an interview structure like STAR, that they are boxing these experiences up, and I don't get a sense of how hard they worked for what they did. Now let me give you an example, and this first example is the answer that I would say most candidates give. Imagine the question is, tell me about your proudest achievement. Now I ran an entrepreneurs conference at university, so I will use this as the example. Now my proudest achievement was when I ran an entrepreneurs conference called Sparks, and I worked within a team of 8 people. Now my role was to manage the team and raise the funds for society, secure sponsorships, and deliver a presentation at the event. Now I was able to raise a large amount of money, over £20,000, and I was really successful and proud of the way I presented in the conference to a large audience. We got great feedback from the attendees, and this is my proudest achievement. Now it's not bad, right? It broadly follows a structure like STAR. There's some specific information in there. It's broadly talking about what my role was, what actions I took. Now the problem is it's not memorable at all, and it's trying to put an answer into a box. You end up losing out on the passion and the motivation, especially if this is supposed to be your proudest achievement. Now compare it to a second example. So this question again, what is your proudest achievement? Now I used to struggle with confidence, and my proudest achievement was when I was able to lead a team and present to an audience of 400 people in what was the largest student-run conference for entrepreneurs in the UK. So in my role, I managed a team of 8 people from a variety of different backgrounds. And this was a really interesting experience because we had a range of perspectives. So for example, one person in the team had this idea to reach out to the shadow business secretary at the time, and he was quite involved in entrepreneurship, and see if he would be interested in getting involved. And he did, he ended up recording a video. Now I was also responsible for pitching to businesses for sponsorship, and I managed to secure £20,000 in funding as a result of the success of my pitches. I was also very ambitious in my vision, so I contacted 5 speakers a day, every single day, and my view was if I kept being persistent, eventually we would find some fantastic speakers. And we did. I ended up liaising with the co-founder of Netflix, MyProtein. We ended up being invited to Buckingham Palace because we invited a member of the royal family. But actually the biggest reason that this was my proudest achievement was that we fully funded 50 people from underprivileged backgrounds to come to the conference. And I was really proud of the impact I ended up having and the confidence I had, even though this was something I was really nervous about, to go up and speak up on the stage. Okay, let's debrief. So I would not say that in a normal conversation. It makes me uncomfortable giving that level of specific detail, but that's exactly what you need to do in an interview. You realize I was being personal there, I was being specific about what we did. I really took the time to think about, okay, I've got this achievement. What are the most noteworthy aspects that are going to be memorable and will leave a lasting impression with the interviewer? The other point is I talked about it passionately. And if this is supposed to be your proudest achievement, you should be talking about it passionately. You should have conviction in what you're saying. You'll see there was a little bit of a story there where I started off as someone that didn't have much confidence, and I was proud of the way it built my confidence. Notice how those experiences were exactly the same examples, but I see this all the time where in interviews people don't include the level of specific detail that showcases how hard they worked for what they did. And right now, I try an exercise. Ask yourself what's something that makes you special, what's something that you uniquely bring to the table that you don't think other people do. Now feel free to rely on your life experiences or your journey you've been through so far, but I'd really take the time to just sit down and write your answers to this question. Now you'll probably find this uncomfortable and it will take time to find the right experiences or the right examples, but you do have unique strengths and experiences that are specific to you. And if you're struggling with this, that's okay, it takes time, especially if you're not used to thinking about your experiences in terms of the best parts of your experiences. But this is why it's so important to do, and to do ahead of your interviews so that you can bring up those experiences in the interview itself. Next, I'm going to move on to the delivery of your answers. You may have seen in my previous video, I talked about the way to improve your interview performance. It's about practice. So what I would recommend you doing is recording yourself on your phone, and I'll give you some questions to practice. Why do you want to be a commercial lawyer? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? What do you understand the role of a trainee solicitor to be? And tell me about a commercial news topic that interests you and why. And so I would have my phone record myself answering those questions. The most crucial part here is to watch yourself back, which is going to be really, really uncomfortable the first time. But there are a checklist of things that you can look for and you can therefore improve on if you're able to observe it in the first place. So I'll take you through this checklist now. Do you project your voice, or are you speaking too quietly? Are you smiling? Because smiling plays this big role in building a rapport with the person on the other side. Do your answers make sense? Can you see it follows a logical flow from the start to the end? Are you speaking in interview mode? Or does it sound like you're speaking in a conversational but professional tone? Are you making eye contact with the camera? And obviously in an interview, it will be, are you making eye contact with the interviewer? Do you have energy in your answers? Say for example, when you're answering the question, why do you want to be a commercial lawyer? You've got to talk about that passionately. If you're supposed to be genuinely interested in the role of commercial lawyer, then in an interview, you need to show that energy. Do you vary your tone of voice? Now this is something that I find difficult, and it's something that I often fall down on, which is speaking in the same tone for the whole of my answer. The problem there is it's easy to lose the interest of the person interviewing you. Between sentences, do you pause or are you rushing through your answers? What is your body language like? Are you gesturing? Do you have this open body language? Or are you closed off? If someone else was listening to your answers, do you think they'd be engaged throughout the whole answer? I think this is a good question to ask, especially because sometimes candidates have these very long answers. If you watch yourself back and find yourself finding your own answer boring, think about how you can try restructuring the answer. Or is there a way you could present this as a better story? Or could you bring more energy to your answer? Now you'll know what the next step is, which is to practice your answer again, using the feedback you've gained from watching your answers to the questions before. And you can then tweak the things that you want to change. Do you need to speak slower? Do you need to better pause between your sentences? Do you need to project your voice, change your body language? If you practice your answers and then reflect on the way your answers are delivered, you can learn how to deliver your answers in a more confident and a clearer way. Finally, I'm going to give you some advice on what I find useful to build confidence on the day. The first thing that I used to do and still do is listen to music or watch motivational videos. I find this gets me into a more confident headspace where I can show up as the person that I want to be in the interview. It stops me from ruminating over things. It just gets me excited, and then I bring that energy to the interview. The next tip is to warm up on the day socially, which is not something I've really seen before, but I found this really helpful. So you don't want the interview to be the first time that you're talking about yourself or even talking generally. So what I would recommend is, whether it's scheduling people to talk to or just speaking to the people around you, the great part of this is, at least for me, it stops me from overthinking. It lowers my level of nerves and it just gets me into the right headspace where I feel the conversation flows so much easier. And lastly, there's a couple of techniques that I've been using for years. One is to imagine I already know the people I'm speaking to, and that makes it so much easier to open yourself up to be vulnerable in an interview. It makes the conversation easier, but I find I'm much able to better build a rapport with the person I'm speaking to because I haven't built up to this moment. I just imagine, we're friends for a long time. Obviously, you're still being professional, but you don't need this huge gap between you. And similar to this, the other thing I do is imagine I'm someone I admire, whether that's kind of the way I'd imagine myself in the future, whether that's me imagining myself already being a lawyer, or just someone that I've enjoyed following, and just ask myself, how would they respond to the situation? It's a little tip that I find helpful to get in the right state of mind. It manages to boost my confidence in situations that I'm nervous about. So that's a wrap. Now remember that self-belief is a superpower. It's so effective in so many different situations, but you have to cultivate it. So use as many opportunities as you can to practice. Now, I really hope that you found this helpful, and best of luck in your training contract journeys. I wanted to let you know that if you found this helpful and would benefit from receiving more advice on this, we are running our first cohort as part of the TCLA Academy on how to pass a law firm interview. So it runs this Wednesday, the 8th of February until Friday, the 10th of February. And we'll be talking about different things on different days. There'll be a live mock interview on the Wednesday. On Thursday, I'll be talking about how to answer common motivational and commercial questions. And you'll work alongside me as we practice answers to these questions. And then on Friday, we'll work for a live mock case study. So if you think you would find that useful, we're doing a different cohort every month. and we will add a link to this video so you can get to the page to access it.